A lot of people get to see you, but I have prayed for a very long time to be able to meet with you.
The teen phase is a time of our lives when we try out so many things. This is why you find teenagers engaging in some unbelievable activities.
16-year-old, upon discovering at about 8:20 that the child was not breathing, yelled for his mother. I'm not certain. I don't know this.
When they do these things, you feel like spanking them, but sometimes their offense goes beyond you and it goes to the hands of the law. And with the law, things can get really serious. From long years in prison to life in prison, these are the 20 longest sentences given to teens.
I was crying in the picture. I was crying that whole night. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't know where I was at, like what was going on or anything.
Did you understand what you stood accused of?
No, I didn't understand.
Number 20, Shondell Jackson. Regardless of the age of an offender when it's time for a sentence to be read, they all wish for it to be minimal. Parole. He became violent and cursed at the judge. Before you judge the judge, let's talk about Shondell Jackson's offense. Jackson intentionally robbed 21-year-old Nathan Potter, a student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
Violent outburst in a Milwaukee courtroom as a man fights with deputies following a life sentence. 21-year-old Nathan Potter was shot to death last summer in River West.
That day, Nathan was walking home to his apartment when Jackson robbed him at gunpoint and eventually shot him to death, probably because he was not carrying any money. Jackson showed no remorse or sorrow during the trial over the victim's death or his crime, and even smiled at the victim's family at one point when he was escorted out of the courtroom.
An outburst.
Number 19, John Freeman Jr. 17-year-old John Freeman of Niagara Falls was a normal teenager to his parents and neighbors until August 2012. John was a neighbor to an old couple whose granddaughter, 5 One night, while Isabella was at her grandparents' spending the night, the old couple left Isabella in John's care and went to bed.
Loved ones will dedicate a tree to Isabella Tennant. She's the 5-year-old who was murdered last year in Niagara Falls. A jury convicted 2 teens in her death.
Before they woke up, John had murdered Isabella and disposed of her body in a garbage container with the help of his friend, 18-year-old Tyler Best. John was sentenced to 22 years to life in prison for killing Isabella, while Best faced a more lenient sentence of 16 months to 4 years in jail.
An extremely huge void in our family, because you never think that something like this could happen to you or your family until it actually does, and you never know who you can trust.
Number 18, Jacob IND. Jacob IND was a young boy in Colorado who lived most of his childhood in abuse. Jacob was suffering, and the only solution he could think of was to kill his mother and stepfather. According to reports, Jacob didn't act alone. He committed the crime with another teenager who helped him in shooting, stabbing, and spraying bear mace on his parents. Jacob was only 16 years old, but he was judged as an adult and faced a harsh punishment as he was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Though he was later granted a new trial, he abandoned it and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. However, Jacob claims that the motivation behind the killings stemmed from years of verbal, physical, and sexual abuse. While Jacob is behind bars, he's maintaining a good character which will give him a chance for parole. Number 17, Jordan Brown. Sometimes when you look at kids, you just can't guess what's going on in their minds. And when they finally act on their thoughts, you wonder if there's an adult in that child's body. Such is the case of 11-year-old Jordan, aged 7 and 4. Kenzie was shot dead in the back of the head while she was sleeping in the house. After the investigation, authorities determined the murder weapon was a youth model Harrington and Richardson 20-gauge shotgun, which was a Christmas gift to Jordan from his father. Jordan was arrested for Kenzie's murder and could have faced a life sentence without parole if he had been tried and convicted for murder as an adult, but he faced custody in a secure juvenile detention center until he reached the age of 21 because he was only 11 when the crime occurred.
I was crying in the picture. I was crying that whole night. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't know where I was at, like what was going on or anything.
Did you understand what you stood accused of?
No, I didn't understand.
The Pennsylvania Supreme Court eventually overturned Jordan's conviction when they saw evidence that points to Kenzie's ex-boyfriend as a suspect. Number 16, Eddie Devine. While some offenders might be granted freedom in their old age, Eddie Devine might never breathe in the Flowood Bed Bath and Beyond a few days before Christmas. According to the police, there was a struggle between Devine, who was armed with a knife, and the victim, who managed to escape. Devine escaped with the victim's car and purse, but that was not the start of Devine's problems with the law. In 2013, he was arrested on 2 charges of armed robbery. And also, he had been charged with rape, kidnapping, and carjacking in Jackson when he was only 16.
What's unique, of course, about the 2 initial appearances this morning is the number of horrendous charges for each defendant and to the ages of the defendant.
Devine was arrested for his crimes and was sentenced to 130 years for crimes he committed in Hinds County alone. Let's not talk about the crimes he committed in Rankin County, because 130 years alone sounds like a death sentence. Number 15, Quantel Lotz. In November 1999, 14-year-old Quantel Lotz got into an argument with his 17-year-old stepbrother and eventually thrusting a hunting knife into him twice. Michael's cut was too deep. He eventually died before he got to the hospital. Quantel was arrested and charged as an adult as he was thrown into the maximum security prison to serve a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 14, John Silva. Normally, kids play together and go their separate ways when they have a misunderstanding. But 15-year-old John Silva had a cruel way of saying goodbye to his friend. After a disagreement over Pokemon cards, John planned how to murder 12-year-old Jerry Lee Alley. John wrote in a note that would later be found with Jerry's body by the police, the step-by-step guide on how to murder Jerry.
He did an extremely personal type of killing. He hog-tied my brother and he strangled him to death.
John strangled Jerry and dumped his body with his bicycle into a dry septic tank. The police were... Antonio Nunez was a 14-year-old boy who kidnapped an adult and even shot at the police. He was arrested and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. He is one of the youngest defendants in California history to receive the penalty. Antonio's sentencing raised concerns as many thought it was cruel and unusual. But the court disagrees. In addition to life without parole, he received 4 additional life terms and 121 years for being found guilty of 6 counts of attempted murder of a police officer, assault, evading, street terrorism, and committing crimes for the benefit of a street gang. That's one very long sentence. Number 12, Nicholas Cruz. The story of this teenager shows the importance of spreading love. 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, who claimed he was deprived of love from everyone, especially at his former school, chose Valentine's Day, a day when love is celebrated, to massacre students and staff of the school. On February 14, 2018, Nicholas Cruz appeared,
and that if I were to get a second chance, I would do everything in my power to try to help others.
As his sentence was read, Nicholas showed no emotion as he sat there shackled like the criminal that he is. Number 11, Lionel Tate. Lionel's case started on July 28, 1999, when his mother, Kathleen Tate, was asked to babysit a 6-year-old girl named Tiffany Unick. Tiffany's mother and Kathleen had been friends for years, therefore she felt it was safe to leave Tiffany in Kathleen's care. 12-year-old Lionel and 6-year-old Tiffany got along well, so after dinner, Kathleen left the two to watch the TV as she decided to go upstairs. At around 10:40 p.m., Lionel went to call his mother and told her that Tiffany was not breathing. Lionel, who weighed 170 pounds, claimed that he was wrestling with Tiffany, who weighed 48 IBs, when she suddenly stopped breathing after she smashed her head on the side of the table. However, the injuries that killed Tiffany contradict Lionel's story. In 1999, both Curtis Jones and his sister Catherine Jones were sentenced to 17 years in prison for the murder of their father's girlfriend, Sonia Nicole Spites. That's the end of the story, but it didn't start there. Curtis and Catherine, who were 12 and 13 years respectively, didn't talk about the motive behind killing Sonia, but they also planned to kill their father and a male relative who they said was sexually molesting them. The siblings shot Sonia with their father's handgun, hitting her 4 times out of 9 bullets fired.
Away, and I know that sounds really, really messed up, but there was just some point where I was just away from all that, and I was by myself, and I was safe.
They immediately realized their tragic blunder and had to run to a wooded area before they were arrested near their Port St. John home on the morning of January 7, 1999. After they pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, they were handed 17 years each. Rosie Clifton in Jacksonville, Florida, then stashed her body underneath his bed and slept just above her corpse for a whole week. After Philip's parents moved to the Lakewood suburbs of Jacksonville, Florida, Phillips became lonely, which made him spend time watching pornography at home. But eventually, he became friends with his 8-year-old neighbor, Maddie Clifton. They were friends for some months until November 3, 1998, when Phillips claimed that he accidentally hit her in the eye with a baseball. Phillips said he was terrified of his abusive father, which made him slit screaming Maddie's throat. After 6 days of rigorous search, Maddie's body was found under Phillips' bed.
Tonight, the sister of this 8-year-old girl killed by her then teenage neighbor in one of Jacksonville's biggest murder cases. Well, her sister says she is sick, thinking that her sister...
Philip was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although he was granted a new sentencing hearing in 2016, it resulted in him being there. Mayu stabbed his great-aunt to death. The police got Mayu and eventually got Cherami, who cooperated with the cops. But even with Cherami's cooperation, she was charged with first-degree murder. Facing the death penalty, Cherami pled guilty to a reduced charge of second-degree murder without comprehending that she was waiving her right to a trial by jury and a direct appeal of her conviction or sentence.
The Supreme Court will rule this term on the constitutionality of these juvenile life sentences in some cases.
The judge eventually accepted her plea and imposed the mandatory sentence for second-degree murder, which is life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Poor Christy. Number 7. Dylan Shoemaker. Dylan Shoemaker was a 16-year-old boy who lived in Springville, New York. Dylan lived with his mother and his girlfriend, Ashley Smith, along with her 2 sons. Dylan stayed at home most of the time to take care of Ashley's sons while she worked at a restaurant. Dylan was sorry, and he apologized, but even with his apology, Dylan was given the maximum sentence of 25 years to life in prison.
I would give my life for Austin. I loved him a lot.
25 years looks shorter compared to the other sentences you've heard, but if you add it even to 1 year, it's close to 3 decades gone. Number 6. Dominic Culpepper. Dominic Culpepper was a teenager that was into what many adults wouldn't dare go into. He was involved with illegal substances, and as if that was not enough, he steals drugs and then sells them. In the summer of 2001, he stole a pound of marijuana and sold about half of it. But another teenager, 16-year-old Wesley McCool, tried to be smarter and stole the remaining part from him. Dominic asked 2 other boys to help him get Wesley so he could be punished. They lured Wesley back to Dominic's house where they surprised him with attacks. They struck Wesley with a bat about 15 times, which eventually led to his death. Dominic was sentenced to life in prison. He noticed 2 teens were trying to rob him. He then remembered he had a gun and used it on them. He shot James Starr and Brandon Phelps to death. Sims didn't run too far before the police caught him.
It was the Andersons that were found with the weapon that the victims had. It wasn't Corp.
He was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder and was eventually sentenced to 120 years in prison after pleading guilty to the charges. Number 4. Kenneth Young. When Kenneth Young was younger, he didn't have good things in life. He was raised in a low-income neighborhood by a mother who was a junkie. That kind of lifestyle led Kenneth to the path he chose. Eventually, when he was 14, he was already wanted for armed robbery. He continued till he was 15 years old when he was eventually arrested. Kenneth was charged for the armed robberies he committed, and he was given 4 life sentences. While in jail, Kenneth focused on rehabilitating himself, and when you thought you have seen it all, Ashley Martinson took things to a whole new level. In 2015, she shot her stepfather, Thomas H. Ayers, and stabbed her mother, Jennifer F. Ayers, more than 30 times. She then locked her 2 stepsisters and 1 half-sister in a room with food and juice before fleeing the state. Martinson was eventually found with her boyfriend in Indiana, where they were both arrested. Martinson told investigators that Thomas Ayers had mentally and verbally abused her, and that she had seen him physically abuse her mother, siblings, and animals too, which is why she thought of killing him. Martinson was originally charged, as an adult, with 2 accounts of first-degree intentional homicide and false imprisonment. She later accepted a plea deal of second-degree murder in March 2016.
Facebook post that Ashley had posted the day before between herself and Ryan Cisco, where she talks about Thomas and that she should just take a gun and shoot him.
And was sentenced to 23 years in prison along guns and shot Danner twice each. After the killing, they jumped into Danner's car to flee but were eventually stopped by the police.
You're out strolling like this.
Think about freedom's only 300 yards that way. It's that close, but yet it's so far away.
They were eventually arrested and the two pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of conspiracy to commit murder, and both were sentenced to serve 25 years in prison. Number 1. Cyntoia Brown. You might find Cyntoia Brown's story emotional, so get your tissue ready. Brown was forced into prostitution by a man known as Cutthroat at a very young age. She had no choice but to go with the flow. She knew she was not supposed to be where she was, but the fear of Cutthroat won't let her stop. One day, a man named Alan picked 16-year-old Brown and agreed to pay her $150 for her service and took her to his house. While there, she wanted to rob him, and so she was sentenced to life in prison. But during her years, her case received attention from the public. Celebrities including Rihanna and Kim Kardashian campaigned for Brown's freedom, and it eventually worked. Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam granted Brown clemency, and she was released in 2019. Thanks for watching. While you're still here, make sure to click the video on your screen for more mind-blowing videos. I'll see you there.